Well, then let's get started and welcome to the participants here that are still coming in and the participants that are watching us on Facebook Live on the COVID support group there. And what we're going to do here is I'll run through just a couple of quick housekeeping. The chat function, we're not going to be monitoring for questions. If you can use the Q&A button at the bottom for that, but feel free to use the chat button to talk to each other or to connect with each other if you would like to do that. And then the Q&A for questions. What we're going to do is Dr. Gordon and Sabila will talk for an hour or so, have a conversation about some of the questions that you've already brought up and some of the issues that we're seeing around COVID, the trauma, the grief, what's unusual, all of those things. And then we're going to go into a little bit more on the Q&A side too. So feel free to put your questions in there. And go ahead, Sabila, you wanted to bring up a couple of things.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add a trigger warning. I know that there are a lot of members of our community who are tuning in, and I would be remiss not to add a content warning. We will be talking about ventilators and vaccines and funerals and population-wide traumas. And if you feel like you're not ready to hear any of these conversations, or if you feel that any of these conversations can trigger you, please, I would highly suggest that you wait for the recording to be available on our group, so then that way you can watch it at your own pace. So back to you, Lynn.
All right. So we're really excited to have Dr. Gordon here. He's a Harvard-educated psychiatrist, internationally recognized for using self-awareness, self-care, and group support to heal population-wide psychological trauma. He's the founder and CEO of the nonprofit Center for Mind-Body Medicine, a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School, and was the chairman under two presidents, Clinton and G.W. Bush, of the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. And when Dr. Gordon started the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, it was in the mid-90s when mind-body things were not as popular and as accepted as they are now. So he's certainly a real leader in this. And his latest book, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, helps us to understand that trauma will really come to all of us. He explains trauma is a human experience, not a pathological anomaly. So everybody experiences trauma. And in the book, he guides us in a comprehensive evidence-based program to reverse the psychological and biological damage that trauma causes. He shows us how we could discover the ordinary joys as well as the meaning and purpose of our lives. And we come to know that our broken hearts can open with greater compassion and love. Sabila Khan is a native of Jersey City, New Jersey, and a mother of two and works in the book publishing industry. And she's going to talk in a minute more about how she, formed this group. But she co-founded the COVID-19 Loss Support for Family and Friends, which is the largest collection of COVID bereaved in the world. And she did that 4 days after losing her community activist father to the virus. So the support group not only offers a safe space for members to grieve their losses, but it also provides free and low-cost mental health resources, weekly meditation classes, 4 weekly Zoom support calls, and memorial and media opportunities. It's also been vital in connecting and amplifying the advocacy effort of the COVID loss communities and the organizations from across the country and around the world. So, Sabila, why don't you go ahead and just share with us a little bit about your experience, and then we'll head right into the conversation between you and Dr. Gordon.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and hello to everyone out there. I'm Sabila, as many of you know, and I lost my beloved father, Shafqat Khan, to COVID on April 14th, 2020. Even in the days leading up to his death, I could tell that there was something uniquely horrifying about what my father, my family, and I were experiencing. My father died alone in a hospital 3 blocks away from us. Due to COVID restrictions, my father's burial was live streamed to our phones. For us, he literally disappeared. On the morning that my father died, I remember that the only shred of comfort I could find was knowing that we weren't alone, that the trauma my family and I were going through was being experienced in homes around the country and around the world. Over the next few days, I had an overwhelming need to connect with other COVID bereaved. And in a serendipitous moment, I found Angelina Proya, who up to that moment was a stranger. and who had also just lost her father. We bumped into each other online, and we decided to start COVID-19 loss support for family and friends together. Over the past 19 months, I've had a very unique vantage point dealing with my own grief and sitting in the grief of the larger COVID loss community. And here's what I know. Our grief is unusual, it is overwhelming and complicated, it's trauma. And I also know that we need help. What we are going through underscores the fact that our nation isn't equipped to handle grief or mental health concerns, that our culture is deeply uncomfortable with grief, and the fact that we are more divided than ever before certainly isn't helping things. So thank you to Dr. Gordon for helping us with your experience as a doctor and clinician who has worked in war zones in regions around the world hit by climate-related disasters and in communities affected by school shootings. And while what we are dealing with is unprecedented in modern times, I am hopeful that Dr. Gordon's experience with traumatized populations can help give us a roadmap to identifying our grief and navigating the way forward. I also want to acknowledge that there are non-COVID bereaved in the audience today, and I hope this talk helps shine a spotlight on the plight of nearly 7 million people in America. For every COVID loss, there are 9 close family members left behind. So these are 7 million people who are suffering largely alone and in isolation. So I hope this helps those listening as allies become more empathetic to what so many of us are going through and become better neighbors, friends, managers, colleagues. So we are going to be talking about the complexities of COVID grief, why it's so unusual, why it's difficult. And I've incorporated today into our talking points questions and conversations that I've had with members of our group. But if you feel that something isn't being addressed, please do drop it in the Q&A here, or you could also put it in comments on the Facebook live stream. So without any further delay, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Gordon. It's so great to have you on.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Sabila, and thank you, Lynn, too, for bringing us together.
Yes, absolutely. She made this happen. And I think we should just jump right into it. COVID loss is a beast. It is complicated and traumatic, and I'd love to talk to you about why that is. I want people to recognize that what they are going through is not normal.
I think, first of all, any loss, any death of someone close to us is traumatic. COVID complicates things and, of course, extends death where it often was not expected. So that's first, or really second, that any death is traumatic. Unexpected deaths shake us up even more. And when those deaths happen in a climate sort of saturated with threats as well as death, and also with tremendous antipathy and anger and fear, the deaths become more complicated. And when we don't have the capacity to come together and mourn, which is fundamental to dealing with the terrible trauma of death. Every culture, I've worked, as you and Lynn mentioned, many places around the world with all different kinds of people and all different kinds of cultures, that always people come together and have ritual and ceremony and are able to be with each other and commiserate with each other and touch each other and eat with each other and cry and then tell stories and laugh together after the death. Well, of course, COVID made that impossible for just about everyone. And for those people who died and took some time dying in hospital situations, there was the added frustration and rage that might come, and as well as terrible grief for not being able to be there. You could feel, see, perhaps talk on the phone or via video a loved one who was dying, and you couldn't be there. So there's this enormous sense of frustration as well as loss. And then once the death came, the profound difficulty of coming together Now, I speak both as somebody who's worked with psychological trauma for 50 years as a psychiatrist, but I also speak as somebody who lost someone to the pandemic. My brother, Jeff, who was 13 years younger than I, whom I never expected to die before I did, he died right at the beginning of the pandemic. And in what complicated it even more is that people knew there was something wrong with him. People who spoke with him on the phone in the few days before he died, they knew he wasn't all there. And yet nobody came over to his house to check up on him because they were scared. They were scared of COVID. So the ordinary reaching out to somebody who was clearly in bad shape simply didn't happen. And it wasn't for a number of days till somebody called me up and said, I haven't been able to reach him on the phone. So and then the loss, and he was very dear to me. He was as much like my child as my younger brother. And so losing him has been a source of profound grief for the last 18 months. And it wasn't until about a year after his death that we were able to come together and to have some kind of memorial for him. So there was a sense of terrible loss, a sense of guilt that I know people experience with COVID, that, well, why didn't I call him in those last days? I knew he'd had some kind of illness, but he said he was fine, but yet I didn't reach out. And why wasn't I there? And when I got that phone call, somebody saying, we haven't been able to get a hold of Jeff. Why did I wait till the next day to check up and call the police?
Right.
So why didn't I think about the medical consequences of this seemingly minor illness earlier on? And why didn't COVID come into my mind? So I understand in a very intimate way the particular complexity of this grief that comes from COVID. The other thing to point out is this is a time of the plague. COVID-19 is a plague. And if you read any of the earlier accounts of plagues, of whether it's Daniel Defoe's account or Boccaccio's account or the accounts of the 1917-18 flu pandemic, you see how disruptive it is to the whole society. So each of us individually is disrupted not only by the death, but by our own fear, our own uncertainty, all the information and disinformation that's out there about what's happening. So it's a very, very complicated situation, which again is further complicated by not having easy access to people who are close to you. And I just want to say, Sabila, that your organization is to me, one of the reasons I responded so quickly and readily is because it's such a godsend that reaching out to other people, as all of us know who've worked with trauma, is perhaps the single most important factor in healing, being able to connect with other people. And I would venture to say it's even more important with COVID because of all the restrictions on connection.
Yeah, I mean, even I still remember being at home while my dad was in the hospital and just feeling so helpless. And there's so many people in the group who speak to the guilt, the overwhelming guilt that they have because they were put in this position where they were rendered completely helpless, but they were also at the same time put in a position where they had to make really important medical decisions, right? Like, should we turn off the ventilator? Is it too late? And everyone is stuck now in that place. That is a very common issue that people in the group are experiencing, where, would have, should have, could have, I should have done this. Maybe I shouldn't have taken my loved one to the hospital. For people who died at home, maybe I should have taken them to the hospital. And now we have a whole new crop of people joining whose loved ones were not vaccinated, which comes with a whole new set of traumas. Maybe I could have convinced them, maybe I should have tried harder. So how do we get out of that mindset, that guilt mindset?
Well, I think the first thing is admitting what's actually going on, that acknowledging that the guilt is there as well as the grief. I mean, if we can't acknowledge it, it's very hard to deal with. As far as the guilt goes, I can speak very personally to that. I felt it very acutely for a number of weeks. And one of the things that I did, and I don't know if this appeals to anybody else, or if you've had this experience, I don't know. I had the experience of my brother being around me after he died. I've occasionally had that experience with other people, but I had it pretty strongly with him. And so I started having a little dialogue in kind of internal dialogue with him and talking about, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that. And as I was talking, and I would be crying, just as I can feel the tears in my eyes. You gave a warning ahead of time. Well, I want to say that if you feel like crying, please do. But the tears are releasing. And I said, Jeff, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. And I could see his face and him looking at me and saying, "Oh, Jimmy," which is what he called me when, still called me that when we were older. He said, "Oh, Jimmy, forget about it. We're from New York. Forget about it. I love you. You love me." So whether or not you talk to your loved one who died in your mind or whatever your belief system happens to be, I think it's important to remember to see the guilt as a moment in your relationship with them, and to be in touch with all of the other aspects of the relationship, all the love, all the connection, all the experiences, with my brother Jeff, it was thinking of him with his 4 little dogs and just laughing with him and remembering the last time I saw him, which had been several months before he died, because he lived across the country. So I think acknowledge, and the guilt for me and for most people gradually dissipates. I can feel it a little when I talk about it now, but it's kind of faded into the landscape of the sense of loss and of everything that I've done to try to help me move through that sense of loss with him. So I can now, what I mostly feel is a pretty pure sadness for little guilt, maybe. I wish I'd been there more, but a lot of it is just, I wish I could reach out to him. I wish I could talk to him about X, Y, or Z, and I still do. And I don't know if I'm really talking to him or it's just my sense of imagination or intuition or whatever it is. But I do talk to him, and I really, if you're inclined to do that, for a while, you talked about triggers. I couldn't watch old American movies, anything from the 1960s and earlier. My brother made his living, and his great love was early classic American movies, and he made his living by selling movie posters and movie memorabilia. And he knew everything about every movie. So for months, I couldn't watch those movies because I would just so overwhelming to me to watch the movies and think about what Jeff would have said and the questions. But it's interesting that I'm talking to you this evening because I just watched a movie with Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon, which is, 1970s or so, but I didn't have that, I wasn't overwhelmed by it. I sort of moved into a different place where I just kind of enjoyed the movie. And it's just in talking with you now that I'm realizing, well, I wasn't overwhelmed the way I would have been a year ago or 6 months ago. So things change. And part of the process of moving through guilt and grief and, frustration and rage and all of the emotions we have is understanding that if we allow ourselves to feel them, to express what's going on. And there were times when I expressed my anger, and I would get on the floor and I kneel on the floor and I'd pick up my arms and I'd pound pillows and shout to get out that visceral, I don't know if you did any of that, just to get out that anger. And I think that I know that's helped me move through the trauma. Whatever the feelings are, I don't deny them. and I allow myself to express them. It could be writing in a journal, it could be pounding, it could be, if I'm feeling frustration, I'll just scream and move my body around. And also if I'm feeling a sense of connection and a sense of joy, I'll allow myself to feel that. And maybe I'll allow myself to dance or move my body. And tears, remembering my brother who loved to dance also. And sometimes we would dance together, and I can feel that with him. And tears may come, but it's helped me move through this grief experience and have a sense of sharing it with him. And then when I have had the chance and took the opportunity to reach out to my other brother, to my niece and nephew who adored my brother who died, and to friends who knew him, I took those opportunities. And I did it on Zoom, or I did it on the phone when I couldn't do it in person. And I have a picture somewhere, I don't know where, it's not, I guess it's but right nearby, I have a picture of him, kind of funny picture.
If you find it, share it for sure.
Yeah, well, let me see. Oh, well, I'll share it a little later. I'll find it. It's in the other room, but I have it right by me. And it's really sweet, and I love to look at it and feel his presence. I actually have 2 pictures of him that I have right nearby in the other room, right nearby where I work.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that you're saying that it's healthy to face the guilt, to sort of honor that emotion, because I think for myself personally, with some people I've spoken to, it's a very painful experience. And in some ways, we're holding that feeling at bay until it becomes too overwhelming, and then it just consumes us, especially in the middle of the night. So
that's why your group is so important. It's important for people when they're ready. No pushing, don't have to push anybody to do it. When you're ready to allow those feelings to come, they're perfectly natural. This is really have to understand that this is part of the process of grieving, the grief, but also the anger, the frustration, the guilt, the sense of abandonment. All these things are this being human. This is not so strange. But we live in a culture which sadly does not allow or encourage this kind of full, the richness, albeit very painful richness of grief. And so we have to do it for ourselves, which is what you're doing, which is what we do at the Center for Mind Body Medicine and our groups when we work with people in groups or individually or in workshops, is give everybody a chance when they're ready to express what they need to.
And I do want us to talk at length about culture, because I think especially now, given COVID and the pandemic, at this need to get it over with, I think that's somehow even exacerbated or heightened. But I do want to go back to something that a lot of people mentioned to me, and I believe is a real serious issue for me as well, where given just the horrible nature of how we lost our loved ones. My father was in a hospital alone for 7 days, in an ER for the first 3 of those days, in a war zone of an ER. And he was awake and he was alert. He never made it onto a ventilator. How do we stop these traumatic scenes from replaying over and over again? This is an issue that I have, and I know many, many people have.
How are those scenes playing over for you?
It usually happens in the middle of the night when I wake up in the middle of the night, and it's hard. I just feel like that's going to haunt me, that's how my father died. That's going to haunt me forever. So I don't know how to get over that.
I'm sorry, what do you feel like doing when you wake up and you have this scene? So you see it visually when you wake up, or you just, and it's a memory?
I see it visually. It's a memory almost. It's a feeling. I feel it right here, overwhelming feeling. And it's hard to break out of it.
So what happens when you wake up? What do you feel like doing?
When I wake up, I'm speaking for myself, I usually wake up in a panic.
In a panic?
In a panic.
What helped, and what does tell me and tell all of us, what does a panic look and feel like?
For me, it's death. I wake up thinking I'm dead.
You think what? I'm sorry?
I feel that I'm dead. And I'm sorry, I do want to, again, these are very triggering conversations. So just mentioning that again for our audience. I feel like I am dead. I will wake up, yes.
So you can't move your body?
I can. Sometimes I sit up bolt upright in bed. And other times I'll just wake up with this feeling of dread or fear that I am dead. And usually that then leads into, this is how my father died.
And how do you come out of that?
I usually come out of it. It happens organically.
But do you get out of bed? Do you stay in bed? What do you do?
I stay in bed.
Okay. So first thing, when these symptoms, these experiences come up, the first question I always ask is, what helps it to get better? And you're saying there's nothing you do, it just kind of dissipates.
Yes,
okay.
Dissipates.
Is there anything that you feel like doing that you don't do? Even if it seems like a weird or strange thing to do.
You know what it is? It almost feels like, as much as the memory is replaying in my head, I'm holding parts of it at bay. That's why what you said about honoring that guilt and recognizing it really resonated with me, because I feel like as much as it's replaying in my head, I'm scared of where it's going to take me. I don't want to.
See, what I might do when I have felt a sense of panic, I move my body. I get up. One of the first techniques that I teach in transforming trauma that we use when we're working with seriously traumatized populations, similar in some ways, a post-war population where people have seen hundreds of deaths around them, including perhaps family members, is it's crucial to move our bodies. Indigenous people understand that the process of dealing with great grief, great anguish, great pain and trauma, that part of that process is moving the body and releasing the pain that's in the body. There are basically two reactions when we're traumatized that we go into. And these reactions are built into our biology. This is not idiosyncratic to you or me or anybody. The first is the fight or flight reaction. So this happens when something in animal, it's all animals, all vertebrates, all animals with backbones have the fight or flight response built into their biology. It's a life-saving response. A predator is coming for you, and you go into fight or flight. And your genetic programming says whether you should fight or you should run. Now, if you're an antelope at a watering hole in the Serengeti Plain and a lion appears, you run. Antelopes are not very smart, as far as we can tell, but their brains are big enough to accommodate the knowledge that it's time to run. You don't fight a lion. If there are two lions there, the lions may fight each other over the territory. So they go into the fight mode. Now, the point of fight or flight, it's meant to be quickly turned on and quickly turned off. That's the biological response. It's life-saving. And if you get away, as the antelope often does, it's over. No more. Antelope, if you look at films, after 3 minutes, the antelope is happily grazing. Fight or flight's come, done its job, and gone. We humans, when we've been traumatized, and particularly when we haven't had a chance to release the trauma, we stay in fight or flight. So panic attack, fast heart rate, right? Blood pressure probably is going up. Panic attacks are a kind of prolongation or reawakening of fight or flight response from the remembered trauma. Now, the other response, which is also at play in you and at times in many, many of the rest of us, is the freeze response. This is also a biological response. And it's the playing possum, the possum that holds still so the predator won't get the possum. If you have a cat, I used to live in the country on a farm and I had a bunch of cats, and some of them were very good at catching mice. And the cat would very proudly bring the mouse back to me in its jaws. And the mouse was just hanging limp in the cat's jaws. Now, sometimes the mouse was dead because the cat had chomped down on the mouse. But sometimes the mouse was just kind of hanging limp and the cat got bored because it's no fun playing with a mouse who's not fighting back. So the cat would put the mouse down, Mousie would shake herself off and go off to the mouse hole. She was in a freeze response. Her body had shut down. She was putting out endorphins to numb the pain. The freeze response came, saved Mousie's life, and left. We humans often stay in the freeze response. The freeze response comes when fight or flight can't do the job. And so for many of us who've lost people in COVID-19, we can't get away, we can't do anything, we can't beat somebody up. We're overwhelmed, and the death or the dying process or both, as well as the mourning, it's overwhelming and it's inescapable, and we shut down. And so your panic attack, part of it's fight or flight, and part of it, I would venture to say, is the freeze response, the immobilization that you're experiencing. Now, the basic antidote for fight or flight is slow, deep breathing. And I teach this in Transforming Trauma. We teach this to people right away. You breathe slowly and deeply, and the people who are watching us or can just do this with us for a couple minutes. Breathe slowly and deeply, in through the nose and out through the mouth with your belly soft and relaxed. Now, I'm closing my eyes because I'm comfortable closing my eyes. If it's easier and better, you can keep your eyes open. Just take a few slow, deep breaths. And as you do this, blood pressure goes down, heart rate goes down, the big muscles that are tensed in fight or flight start to relax. The digestive system that shuts down in fight or flight begins to work more efficiently. And the amygdala, which is a part of the emotional brain responsible for fear and anger, which goes into high gear when we're in fight or flight, that begins to quiet down as well. And the frontal part of our cerebral cortex, the areas responsible for clear thinking and good judgment and self-awareness and compassion, begin to come back online. So part of the way to deal with this kind of reawakened, triggered fight or flight is with slow, deep breathing. But if that doesn't work, then what's needed is moving the body. Technically, slow, deep breathing is a concentrative meditation, focusing on the breath, on the feeling of your belly being relaxed. There are also mindfulness meditations which quiet the body down. But if we are in a freeze state, as you were when you were sort of in bed and somebody in the chat said, I feel paralyzed, then the antidote is moving the body. And the simplest thing to do is to get up, stand up, put your feet shoulder width, and just start shaking your body. And I teach, and the technique that I teach in Transforming Trauma and that we use is usually three parts: shaking the body to begin with, and you can use you can either just shake it, shake your body just without music, or use fast driving music without words to encourage the shaking. And as you shake, you start to melt your trauma frozen body, and emotions may come up, and that is natural. So you need to give yourself some time to just let the emotions come up. And then in the 3-stage meditation that I teach, and the script for it is there in Transforming Trauma, and people can look on our website, cnbm.org, to hear me repeat this and see people shaking and dancing. The second phase, you just stand quietly, pay attention to your breath and your body. And the third phase is you allow your body to move to music that is energizing and inspiring for you. And we're all different, so we all choose different kinds of music. I like reggae, so I tend to use reggae, but other times I may use other kinds of music. This is the way to deal with that triggered, that reawakened trauma, is to move your body.
Even in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, anytime. The conscious mind is saying, oh, it's the middle of the night, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be asleep, or what if I'm going to wake my husband or my partner or my kids? Well, go somewhere where you can do it. And if emotions come up, I'm pretty used to it, so I just allow the emotions to come up, or I write them down in a journal. But if there's fear about emotions coming up, it's great to have a buddy, a person, maybe somebody from your group that you can call if you need to, and no matter what time it is. I think that's really, especially in the beginning, that can be really important. And give yourself some time. Often I'll suggest that people who've experienced trauma do this shaking and dancing every morning. Not just when they have when their body feels totally frozen, but as a kind of routine for loosening up, for letting go of this trauma that gets fixed in our bodies. And I suggest that you do this shaking and dancing, which maybe takes 12 or 15 minutes, but give yourself some time afterwards. Don't rush into the car. Get up early enough so that you can take a little time to write down what happened, have a little time to feel the emotions, and if you need to call somebody else up, whether it's a friend or a therapist or a clergy person, whoever it is who you feel comfortable with, to be able to share the experiences that have come up. But this is really important. And this is foundational to healing trauma. Unfortunately, many people who work with trauma, therapists, don't work with these physical techniques, which are so powerful. It's very good to talk with people. Quiet meditation is extremely important. The 15 or 20 imaginative techniques that I teach in Transforming Trauma, they're all useful, but moving your body is really central to healing trauma. Indigenous people, Aboriginal people all over the world know it. We've forgotten how important it can be. And once you start doing it, you'll realize it. It's not a question of believing me. All of these things that I'm saying, I've tested on myself. I've worked with, tens of thousands of people. And we've used these techniques with hundreds of thousands of people. And the research is pretty good, but the proof is in your own experience. So see what happens. See if you feel a little bit freer after you've moved your body, a little bit more, maybe even eventually able to go back to sleep. Who knows?
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, and that I would love to talk about community more, because you did just talk about being able to reach out to clergy or to folks within the group if we are in a dark place. And you also mentioned in your group the importance of finding community support within your own religious institutions or family and friend networks. And that has clearly been completely upended by the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's always important after trauma. It's even more important in this pandemic because of the separation that's affected all of us, not some, I was going to say so many, everybody's been affected one way or another. I mean, even those people who deny that COVID is happening and, say, don't wear a mask, you're a fool, you're an idiot. Though, where do you think that rage, what's stoking that rage? It's partly their own unadmitted fear of what's happening and their refusal to deal with it. So it's not exclusively that, but COVID has affected everybody in this country. I was just talking with people in Iran, people in Africa, people in the Middle East, everywhere people have been severely affected.
Well, and there is this sense of there's fatigue even among people who haven't lost someone to COVID. So that support isn't there anymore. Everyone feels so beleaguered that I can't turn to the people who I would normally turn for. And there are people within our community who, there's controversy within the families because within their families, these people who they would have turned to, they might be COVID deniers or they might be anti-vaxxers. So these support systems are gone. So how do we find these support systems?
Well, I think you're offering the support system. And I think that you start wherever you are. One of the things that I've done during this pandemic is I have reached out more and more to old friends. And my suggestion to people who are watching us is if somebody comes into your mind, I'm wondering what's happening with so-and-so, maybe I should call. Well, instead of waiting till you hear that message 10 times, make that phone call.
Right.
That's your intuition giving you a message. What I've found during this pandemic, when I've reached out to people, everyone has been happy to hear from me. Even people whom I don't know that well. There's a sense of, oh yeah, it's great to hear from you. I'm more in touch, for example, with high school classmates whom I didn't have, hadn't seen for years. But if they come into my mind, I just drop them a little note, say, hey, how you doing? What's happening? Or I make a phone call. So do that, whoever it is. And I know that so many people feel isolated. My suggestion is pay less attention to the people from whom you can't reach out to and reach out to the ones you can reach out to now. That it will be, I think, very surprisingly rewarding to do that.
Right. And I just read in someone's comment that people just don't want to deal with your grief anymore, which goes back to our population being beleaguered for once. There is, I think everyone is sort of at the end of their line, of their rope, but also it speaks to our culture not being comfortable with grief.
Yes. I think it is, but it is over. This has been what? It's 19 months.
Almost 2 years.
Yeah, of this fear and this isolation. And, I've had the 2 vaccines and I've had the booster and I'm going out. I'm starting to, work. We've done all our work online for the last 19 months. All our groups, all our training programs, meetings with individual patients. I've done it. But the last few months, I've started, my patients are coming here. I'm going out. I'm going places where I feel comfortable, sitting outside. I say hi to people on the street. Anybody walks by, I live in a house in Washington, D.C. People walk by. I say hi. Many of them say hi back. Washington is not the most friendly town in the world. The old saying in Washington is, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. but I've said many people are, they get it because everybody's experienced this isolation. Now, some people look at me like I'm crazy or what do I want, but I don't worry about that too much because the feeling of wanting to connect is strong. We are all, as you say, beleaguered, and we've all been overwhelmed by what's happening. So we need to make the best of the opportunities that we have. Not only the opportunities to grieve, but also the opportunities to greet people whom we are old friends, and also to greet people just just to greet them, to establish that human connection.
Right, and that's interesting that you say that you are starting to sort of enter the real world again, because I do feel that there is a sense of anxiety. There is a lot of COVID anxiety in the group, in the community, because we've seen the worst of it. We've seen what it can do. For me personally, it's my mom who's had the booster, but I just feel like I can't lose another person, and my little ones who just got their first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. So I don't want to put them at risk, but I think there is that constant sort of push and pull between wanting to return to normalcy, but being held back by our own fear and trauma.
And this is you're absolutely right. And we have to really use our intelligence and discrimination. One of the tragedies of this time is how many people have stopped using their brains and how many people have allowed themselves to be kind of totally propagandized. It's a tragedy for them and for our society. But what we need to do is really think through what is the actual risk here? And is it worth it to take that risk? So I have two people, two of our staff are working with me. I work out of my home. I have two staff who come here. We don't wear masks. They take good care of themselves. I take good care of myself. I'm careful. So we feel comfortable, and it's great. And other members of our staff have not come and worked together, and they're more alienated from one another. My team, we sit, we have a cup of tea together, we do our work together. We trust each other, and we're all careful. So I think everybody's got to make those decisions for themselves. Meditation is central to the work of healing trauma. And I've talked about quiet meditations as the antidote to fight or flight, active, expressive meditations like shaking and dancing as the antidote to the freeze response. Both of them help to bring us into balance so we can use our brain and not only our cognitive intelligence, our problem-solving ability, but also our ability to use our intuition. When you're in a state of panic or you're shut down, you can't trust yourself. I'm in a state, a much more balanced state now, and I have pretty good sense what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and it's not only my medical knowledge. When you're in a state of panic, that medical knowledge goes
out the window.
Out the window. I'm more or less most of the time in a state of balance, and I say, okay, does this make sense? Does that make sense? Do I wear a mask here? Do I not wear a mask there? And I just pay attention. I tune into what I need to do, and as we all do that, we get much clearer about our decisions, and it's different for everybody. Everybody has different sense of safety, different sense of tolerance, different need to connect, but we all have the capacity to make those decisions for ourselves.
Well, and it's also a matter, I think, of honoring it where everyone is, and hoping that your colleagues or your friends who are throwing a party that you don't feel comfortable with attending, you would hope that you get the best from them. You have them respond and say, I understand that your experience of the pandemic may not have been the same as mine. I have so many questions for you. The one overwhelming thing in our community is triggers. Triggers abound, obviously, with COVID loss. A woman told me that she lives in New York City, and the sound of the ambulance is triggering, which obviously, if you live in the city, that can be debilitating. Phone calls, phones ringing, which for those of us who've had a loved one hospitalized with COVID, getting that one phone call a day, that update, that was like a trauma all unto itself, which people don't understand, by the way, if they haven't lived through this. So what are our triggers? How do we identify them, and how do we tackle them?
Well, I think as long as we're paying attention, as you are, you've identified the triggers. Everybody, If your heart starts racing, so okay, what happened just now that made my heart start to race? What made me get tense? What made my hands sweat? You can feel the trigger is a trigger of fight or flight or freeze response with all the mental and sort of images that may come with it. But it's basically a biological trigger. So pay attention to the change in your body and in your thought processes. And then you'll know, just as you know, it's the ambulance, it's the phone, and trust that. Don't say it shouldn't be the phone. Well, it's not a matter of should or shouldn't. It is the phone. My first suggestion is move your body. I always think about during one of the wars in Gaza, the leader of our team there, Jamil, who's a Palestinian psychologist, he was working in the shelters for children, the UN shelters. Bombs were falling. Those bombs, of course, were a trigger for panic. I mean, these kids had been subjected to bombs in their own homes. He would get the kids up shaking and yelling and screaming when the bombs fell. And the kids were able to get rid of that physical shutdown feeling, that terrible panic by doing this. And they did it time after time after time because the bombs kept falling. So this is the first thing. Move your body, release that feeling of paralyzed panic that comes to us so often when we're triggered. That's the simplest. The first thing is to say, admit, I'm triggered, and this is what did it. And don't say, I shouldn't be triggered by that. That's BS. You are. The reality is you are. So, okay, now get rid of it. It's also not a lifetime sentence. And the more you release it, doesn't mean you may not be triggered. It may not, but just like I gave you the example of watching the old American movie this evening. Every other time, for a long time, I literally stayed away. I love movies. I get on a stationary bike and I watch movies on my TV. I stayed away from old American movies. I've started to come back. When I first began to watch them, I would get anxious and I could feel that anxiety. And sometimes I'd stop and sometimes I would just move my body. Maybe I'd be on the stationary bike and I would get rid of the tension that way. Yesterday, I started watching this movie. I wasn't triggered by it. So that's change. That's a change that's happened over these months. So understand this doesn't mean you're always going to be triggered. And accept it when it comes and find a way. Somebody may need to yell and scream. Somebody may need to go out and smell the flowers. I don't know what. Everybody's going to have a different way. The fundamental way for me and over millennia for people who have been traumatized and are triggered is to move the body, to let it out of the body, to let go of it.
Great, thank you for that.
And then write down what happened. And write down, I heard the ambulance and my shoulders got tight and my jaw clenched and my heart rate went up and I didn't, I wanted to hide under the bed, but instead I rolled around on the floor or I got up and I shook and I danced, and that numb feeling that came when I was triggered started to go away after a few minutes and I could feel my body again and it felt good. And I'm angry that I'm still triggered, but I'm still here. So whatever you want to write down, whatever comes to you. And just, if we keep it inside, it poisons us. We need to find a way to release what's going on, physically as well as mentally and emotionally.
Thank you for that. Now, I know that this is very important to me, the next point. The American Academy of Pediatrics recently declared a national state of emergency in children's mental health. Over 140,000 children in the US have lost a parent or a grandparent caregiver to the pandemic. And obviously, the inequities that result from structural racism have contributed to disproportionate impact on children from communities of color. And, I saw firsthand how the loss of my father impacted my children. My father lived 3 blocks away from us. He was a part of their lives from day one. And it's been heartbreaking to sort of carry my own grief, but then to carry theirs as well, particularly my 9-year-old sons. So how do we help children during this time?
Well, the most important thing, and you probably come to realize it, is to deal with your own grief, to go through your own process and do not deny it. And if your child, catches you staring off and maybe tears come into your eyes and ask you, share it with the child. That this is because what you're saying is, I recognize as normal this process of grief with all its complexity, all its emotions, and it's okay, which says to your child profoundly, whether you say it in words or you just say it by being yourself, that it's okay for the child to feel the feelings that they're feeling. That's crucial. They need to be able to be okay with it. And you can talk to them and say something like that. Say, this is, when you see them brooding, or if they don't come to you and say, I'm thinking this, or I had this nightmare, or I'm thinking about granddad, or whatever it is. But you can just talk to them, say, this is a time of grief. We've all lost somebody we love. And if feelings come up, that's perfectly understandable, and you can come and tell me. And if I cry too when you tell me, that's okay, because I'm grieving too, and it helps me when you talk to me about what's going on, and it helps me to help you. So that's the way I would do it with kids, to let them know it's okay, let them understand that grieving is a part of life. See, our children, there was this famous book by Ernest Becker called The Denial of Death. We live in a society that denies death. If you go to, an African village, people go to funerals. Everybody goes to the funerals.
Right.
People here, they don't let little kids go to the funerals, right? They don't know, you can't see grandpa, you can't see grandma. Right. Well, there is a wisdom. Now I'm not saying everybody should have their kids go to funerals, but there is a wisdom in it. Death is a part of life. And the more we can allow our children to understand that their feelings about loved ones who've died are perfectly normal, the easier it's going to be for them, the easier it's going to be for them to go through a mourning process. So I think that's the way. And when your kids have reactions that may seem a bit strange, like wanting to, the giggling, for example, that may just it's okay. How can you do this when grandpa? No, that's their reaction. That's what's coming up in them. And maybe it's a defense mechanism, or maybe it's just they thought of something funny about grandpa. Who knows what it is? But it's okay. We've got to create the space for our children to go through what they have to go through. Now, you mentioned that people of color, and also I would add people who are particularly vulnerable because of their occupation, who are usually people who either frontline healthcare workers or first responders, or people in occupations like bus drivers, where they sort of had to be out there and they needed the money. They have suffered even more. I do not know a Black adult who hasn't lost a family member or close friend. And I've got a lot of Black friends, every one of them. And some of them have lost many, many people. So it is more overwhelming. We need to acknowledge that. And this is somewhere down the road, but we need to be thinking about what are the lessons that we have to learn. And there are obvious lessons, which they're obvious to me, that we're all connected to each other. The virus tells us that it's contagious. that if I take care of myself when I meet you in person, I'm taking care of you. If you take care of yourself and wear a mask and get the vaccine and keep your distance, you're taking care of me. So one of the lessons is we're all connected to each other if we pay attention to that lesson. And that's a very healing lesson. And we're all connected to each other across these economic and class and racial and political divides. One of the tragedies, additional tragedies of this time of COVID, is people feel like they're not, those are those other people. I had nothing to do. Those are the anti-vaxxers, or those people are the crazy people who wear masks, whatever it is. Those are the Republicans. Those are the Democrats.
Right.
But we need one of the messages of this pandemic is we need to get beyond that division, beyond that separation, that we are all fundamentally connected with each other. We are, the Lakota people say, all my relations, we're all related to each other. And that's part of our healing, is the relationships with people who are close to us. But also part of the larger process of healing is a sense of connection to a larger world that goes beyond our immediate circle. That in itself, that understanding for me and for many, many people is healing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's part of the struggle that the community is facing, because we're seeing the people who are sort of flouting the science and flouting the rules, and it seems to be, it's just even for me, I try to stay optimistic. It's hard to sort of see the end here, that light at the end of the tunnel where things will get better, where people will be less divided. So I think that sense of hopelessness is pervasive right now in not only our community, but throughout the world.
I think you're right. And that is a real problem. And even as you're speaking, I was thinking, well, what helps me get out of that hopelessness? And the first thing that came to me is seeing Linda Eagle Speaker, who she's a tribal elder, and she's one of our faculty at the Center for Mind Body Medicine. And when I see her, we have faculty meetings, staff meetings, we're doing training programs, and I see Linda, and she just puts this big smile on my face, and I think, I'm looking forward to seeing Linda in person. And I know she's looking forward to seeing me, and that's part of my light at the end of the tunnel. Or I feel comfortable, as I did about 2 months ago, I'm going to get a pedicure. I went and I was wearing my mask. I got I got my nails cut and I got a foot massage, and it was great. And it was like, okay, this is a little sliver of normal life, and everyone's wearing masks, and I've been completely vaccinated. So it's partly the anticipation of people we love and those connections, and partly actually doing something that is part of the life that extends beyond the pandemic, and having that experience. And it's not, it's something that goes deep. I don't even need to sort of figure it all out, but I know that after I had that pedicure, aside from my feet feeling better, that I had, this is like a little bit of normal life is back, and more of it is likely to come.
Now, what you're saying about watching your friends speak, I think that resonates with me, because I think it's easy to sort of get sucked into the anger and the vitriol and just focus on that. And what I did very early on in the pandemic, I got sucked into that. I did. I found people to argue with on Facebook. And then I realized it was just completely depleting me. It was like crushing my spirit, and it was not helping me. So I made a very conscious choice at that point to focus on the helpers, as Mr. Rogers says, in times of crisis.
The other thing that you've done that's very important, and I think very important for everybody in your community, as well as for others, is you reached out to share and to help. It's not only the fact that other people are there for you, it's that you're doing something for and with other people.
Right.
And this is vitally important part of our healing. This is one of the major ingredients of what psychologists are now calling post-traumatic growth. It is a process that is potentially, that is a natural process if we allow it to happen, where when we have been traumatized, that we tend to want to reach out to other people, to be of help to other people, to connect with them. If we open ourselves to that possibility, then we feel, and I think that Lynn may have said this in the introduction, then we do feel better. We have a sense of meaning, that there is some meaning that comes out of this terrible trauma. And the meaning may be that I'm helping other people, maybe in a way that I never did before. I know your job, because you told me you're not a professional helper. You know, your job is something different. Your job is but now you're helping a whole community. You're in a whole different place. And this is true for potentially for everyone, that reaching out to help other people, I don't mean in a, sanctimonious way, oh, I'm helping, but just because it feels like the right thing to do. That's such a profound part of the healing process for potentially for all of us. And in our small groups, what people will say is, it's amazing. I came here to get help from other people, and I have, but it's also so good to feel that my experience is of some use to somebody else. That the woman, across the country who looked at my drawings, and she looked at the drawings of my own grief and my own hope that came out of that grief, that she recognized herself in that and that it helped her. That made me feel so good. That's part of my healing.
And, we've seen that happen within our group. We've seen people who've lost someone in the early days, like I did, step up and guide people who are newly bereaved through their trauma and their loss, or be moderators to help us in our group and run support calls. So it's been very rewarding to see that. I do have more questions for you. How do we reach people? How do we reach the people who I feel need us most? And these are the people who might not know the dominant language. These are people who might not have access to time, to the computer, to high-powered, fast-feeding internet. How do we reach them?
What we have,
and where does the government step in? Like, does the government have a role in that, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Does the government have, what is the government's role in this?
I mean, our government is, I'm sort of making it, I want to say something that is suitable for children. Our government really has been unresponsive.
Yeah.
What we need, and I have done my best, and I'm speaking with people in Congress, and I'm doing my best to get to people in the administration. We need a national program, a public health program. This is not a medical issue. This is a public health and educational issue. We need a program for the whole country where we reach out to people in every community, in every imaginable way, to give them the kind of opportunity you're giving to the people who are part of your community, the kind of opportunity we're doing at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. We do not have a program for it. If anybody who's listening has contacts in the Biden administration who can help to make it happen, be in touch with me, jgordon@cmbm.org. If people have money and want to help us, maybe we can work together to help organize this on a large scale here in the US. What we've done in both Haiti and Gaza, where there's very little access to internet for many, many people because of poverty. Also, there's very little access because they only have power a few hours a day. We've put out this information, basic self-care information on the radio. People in both places listen to radios, and we also do it via cell phones because people have cell phones. So we create programs on the radio, on cell phones that everybody can listen to. We're doing our best to make our work available. I hope you'll make this program as widely available as possible and reach out to other people. I talk with people who are, quote, influencers. I've worked, for example, and I reach out to, ones who I know or can have contact with. My friend Robin Wright is a wonderful actor. She was in House of Cards, and she made a wonderful movie about trauma, which I recommend, called Land. Have you seen that?
I have not. I've seen
A
Forrest
beautiful
Gump.
movie. First movie she's directed. She started it. I was an advisor on it. It's a
Wow.
wonderful movie, and I think very healing for people, about a woman who's been terribly traumatized by deaths. So I reach out to people and I say, can you help me get the word out? So I think everybody who's listening to us, who thinks that this program is useful, share it. Share it on your social media. Reach out as widely as possible. Share it with people who you read about in the news. I never hesitate to get in touch with people who I think have had something interesting to say on a subject that interests me. And here in the subject of trauma, I reach out to them, and sometimes they respond, sometimes they don't. So we have to put our heads together to see what we can do, and whatever we can do. And maybe your organization can start talking. You have 13,000 people, right? Start talking. You live in New Jersey, you work in New York. Talk with Eric Adams. I'm talking with Eric Adams and his team. Let's see if we can bring, my particular one focus is working with the police in New York, who are plenty traumatized, but let's bring a mental health program like this to New York City, to everybody in the city.
Right.
So whatever the means is, speak out about this and do whatever you can.
Yeah, we're trying our best here. Oh, I have so many more questions, but Lynn is back.
I'm the time police here today. Sorry. It's been such an interesting conversation, and we could obviously talk for hours on this. I wanted to bring forward a couple of the themes, though, that I'm seeing. So to bring it from, one of the things that people are expressing is that feeling of hopelessness. And, Dr. Gordon, you've talked about moving your body. You've talked about getting involved and helping other people. People could join the Facebook group, the COVID support group. That would be a wonderful place to be able to. So many people in the chat have said, this is my experience. This person died. This is what I'm feeling like. And it's so helpful to be able to talk with other people about that and to share that. So that's one thing. But there's two kind of themes around anger that are coming up, and maybe one of them you could address, because it's coming up to American Thanksgiving and then Christmas and other holidays during December and January. What happens when there's someone in your family, or maybe it's several people in your family, who don't believe that COVID is real, and maybe they're acting in a very angry manner with people, they're refusing to wear masks, maybe you feel like you can't go to a holiday, you can't connect with them. So that's several people have mentioned that. How do you work with that in your own family when someone is a COVID denier and it's just kind of blowing up your relationship in the family?
Well, I would say, I would ask the question, what's coming up in you as that person is speaking or shouting at you? And I suppose, if I'm trying to imagine, because my family are not COVID deniers. And the people I met who are, including some in the health professions, I don't have that intimate relationship, so it's not such a big deal. I just ask them why. But I would say what it brings up in me. I might say, I lost so-and-so. I lost my father. I lost my brother. And it makes me really sad when you bring this up, or it makes me angry, whatever it makes you. And, I don't know how to deal with this, because I actually lost someone I really care about. And it feels, when you speak this way, it just, I don't know what to say. I would leave it at that. And if you might say, and I really can't be in the room with you. And or I need you to stop talking about it. I would speak from my own deep experience. I wouldn't get in an argument. I mean, you're not going to win the argument anyway.
Right.
It's just this is not a rational. The person is not rational on this subject. This is something that they believe, because rationally, and I'm not saying that vaccines are not the panacea. Clearly, they have limitations, but I think anybody looking, thoughtfully at what's going on is going to say, well, the vaccine is probably, a better way to go than being so vulnerable to COVID. Or maybe they say, I've done the calculus and I'm really afraid of the vaccine. I don't want to. All right, that's you, but don't come near me. I think we have to respond from our own personal experience and just not be drawn. People who have these incredibly dogmatic ways of looking at the world, they love to fight. They're the ones who are getting on the internet and shouting at people and threatening people and, saying how everybody else is crazy. I really don't want to be around those people. If they're in my family, I would do what I'd say. I'd share what's going on with me. I'd say, I don't want to talk about it. And if they start talking about it, I got to keep my distance. I'm going to go in the next room and sit at the kids' table and eat the turkey there.
Yes. And then the other aspect that a lot of people are talking about is the anger at people who are not getting vaccinated and who have put everybody else at higher risk. And so that's something too. What would you say for someone who's really angry about that?
Well, what are they angry? Who have they put at risk? That's the question. If they put me at risk, I'd say I get furious at them for doing that if they're close to me, and I'd stay away from them. So can't be around you.
On a wider.
I'd love to jump in here because I think, like, as a member of this community, we almost feel like we're being held hostage by the bad behavior that these people are exercising or are putting up on display. They're living their lives. They're unvaccinated. They're flouting mask mandates, while the rest of us are just still, we're being denied normalcy.
But so the question is, who are those people to you? If they're the mass of people, you see them on the screen, you see them on the street, and you feel angry, just get out your anger. I don't personally, if people are in I don't get into confrontations with people. I don't feel a need to. I'd stay away from them if I can. If I might, but that doesn't mean I might. If I'm in a grocery store and somebody doesn't have a mask, what I have done so far is I just stay away from them. I just don't go in. But I suppose I might say something to them. I've chosen not to do that. I think people have to decide what they want to do.
So I just want to read the comment that Pam put in. She said, these people are my community. 50% of my community is unvaccinated. Or these people are also family members.
So what do you do? How do you deal with it? How do both of you deal with that? I don't have that.
I don't have that experience. I live in my bubble. I don't have that experience.
What about you, Lynn? Do you have that experience?
I do. Yeah. Someone in my family who I love and is a good man has fallen into that hole and is acting in a very rude way and dismissive and contemptuous of people who believe that COVID is real and that we should be vaccinated.
So how do you deal with that?
I try to remember that I love him and that, to circle back to what you said, that moment of guilt about whether or not I should have called or what happened just before your brother died. So this incident of this time right now where he believes that COVID is a hoax, that's only one moment in our whole lifetime of relationship. And so this is someone I love. I've known him since he was a baby. And so I'm trying to remember that and to keep an open heart so that if hopefully, and when he comes back to more reason around this, that I'm open-hearted towards him and we can reconnect.
Beautiful. If you can do that, that's great.
It's a practice. Yeah, it's a practice.
It's, it's very, I'm sure it's very difficult and painful, especially if you've experienced the death of somebody close to you. If somebody is saying, what are you worried about this? This is crap. This is, you've been fed misinformation by, these criminals, whatever they say. So I think it's a combination of talking about the pain that would cause me, and asking them to shut up politely. For my sake. If you care about me, you have your own opinion, but you're unvaccinated, so I don't feel safe being close to you. And please don't say this because it's very upset. Please don't talk this way because it's very upsetting to me. If they keep talking, I would get out. I mean, depend, you might want to punch them out, but I probably it's less trouble just to leave. And say, I can't be around this. I don't want to be around that at that time because it's so hurtful to you, because they're so disrespectful. I think the point is that they're being disrespectful of your grief and of your concerns. And if you can let them know that this is me, this is your sister or your cousin, or and this is what it does to me when you talk this way. And I've talked this way to some people in Congress who have difficulty dealing with the deniers in Congress. And it's been helpful. One of the people I'm talking with, he said, I expected this guy to apologize to me, and then maybe we can have a relationship. I said, good luck with that. Yeah. That's not going to happen. No. So, he spoke about his own distress, the threat to his life. And then that's it. And left it to the other person to take that in and deal with it however they're going to deal with it. And then, of course, there's some people you can't talk to at all because, they're just so, Jesus had a nice thing to say. He said, don't throw pearls before swine. It's very smart. Don't try to convince people, nothing against pigs particularly, although there's some question about the status of pigs, but pigs don't understand pearls. There's no point in it. It's a waste of time. So
then our practice is to let people be as they are, and that's a hard thing to do.
That's hard. And I want to say that personally, I look at the unvaccinated community as being victims of a campaign of misinformation. And I do want to believe that more people are open to the vaccine than not.
Sure. And the other thing is unvaccinated people, and we see them on television often enough, is when they lose somebody, they're in the same or a similar boat. They have the same kind of terrible grief. And often that grief opens them to other possibilities. The grief opens their minds to other possibilities. So I think we have to be, as compassionate as we can be, and people will change if and when they're ready. But talk about guilt. If you listen to those unvaccinated people who've lost family members, the guilt is horrific.
Horrific. It's a whole other trauma.
You start realizing, what this dogmatic, uninformed, or poorly informed, I should say, poorly informed stance has cost them.
Yeah.
It's a whole other layer of trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And there's going to be a lot that they have to recover from, even more than those of us who've lost people where we have behaved as responsibly as we possibly can.
So we're at the end of our time. So one of the things that really came through strongly is to connect with other people and to try to help. So use your experience, if you have experience with this, to help, to join the Facebook group. The links are in the chat for Dr. Gordon's group, Center for Mind Body Medicine.org, cmbm.org, and to not be so isolated with this, to really take the risk to connect and to feel what you're feeling, to move your body, to breathe, all of those things that help the nervous system. So do you want to each just take a minute or two to kind of sum up? Is there anything that you've left unsaid that you'd like to finish with?
Well, shall I go first, Sabila, or you want to go
Sure,
first?
that's fine.
So I just want to invite people not only to join your Facebook group, but to look at our website, cmbm.org. We have online mind-body groups that are led by people we've trained. Those groups are going on. It's a sliding scale. I think for 8 2-hour groups, it's $325. But if you can't pay that, if you can only pay $32 for 8 groups, that's fine. We don't never turn anybody away. For those who are interested in learning how to do our model with other people, we train people, and you don't have to be a health or mental health professional. Any of you who is interested in learning this comprehensive approach of self-care and learning how to lead groups, we can train you to, I hope the 2 of you will come to our training. We can train you to lead these groups. And we have a full training program for that. You can learn about it on our website. Right now, we're doing it online. We have 2 cycles beginning, one in February, one in March. And finally, read my book, Read Transforming Trauma. This is what it looks like. Here it is. And you can get a copy, you can buy it online, Amazon, or anywhere else, and use it. And my suggestion is that you can use the techniques that I teach in here. It's a comprehensive approach, and share them with somebody else. It makes it better, easier. It's more effective if you do that. So just begin and understand there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it is possible on most days, as you begin to use these techniques or share in your Facebook group or other places, that you'll begin to get glimpses of that light. Don't forget that. And when you feel despairing, remember that you have seen that light, maybe in talking with someone else or doing breathing or moving your body. So that's what I have to share. And I just want to also say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you, and really what an honor to be part of what you're doing, of you coming together as a community, helping yourselves and one another to heal. It's what's needed everywhere in our country and everywhere around the world. So thank you
so much. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's really truly so appreciated. And I just want to go back to the community that I keep on thinking about that Tuesday morning when we woke up to the news of my dad passing. And that was literally the only thing that was giving me any hope that there were others out there that were going through what I was going through. And I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to start this group with Angelina. Big shout out to Angelina. But I want to make sure that people understand that they are not alone in this. They are not alone. People share in your grief and in your trauma, and together we are stronger. Thank you. This has been such a special event. I really
thank you, and thank you again for what you two and all of you are doing.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be able to be here together.